let's chat about all the books I read in the month of May. In May, I read 14 books and my average rating was a 3.07. So all in all, not a great month. I was expecting to read more books this month because I was a team leader, co-team leader for the Escape the Read-a-thon, and I was reading a lot, but I did get a little burnt out in the back half. So I think reading a lot in the beginning did burn me out a little bit in the end of the month. And I didn't end up with as many great reads as I was hoping to have. My average rating is a little bit low this month, almost the lowest that I've had all year, but I do have some new favorites that came out of this list, and one of them is a really weird one for me that was a surprise. As always, I'm gonna be going in order from my least favorite to my most favorite. Starting with the books that I DNF'd. The first one I DNF'd is one that you saw me DNF in a reading blog. That was The Body Harvest by Michael J. Sedlinger. This is the same author as the book Anybody Home, which I did enjoy when I read that book a couple years ago, so I was very interested to check this one out. It is a shorter horror novella that is about this man and this woman who have an affinity for getting sick. They seek out sicknesses together and they end up coming across this group who reaches out to them, and then they get pulled into these other people, and it is just this disturbing, strange, depressing sort of read. I almost finished this book, really. I got like 70% through it, but I just was not having a good time. The story was also kind of losing me because it gets a little bit abstract in certain ways. And all in all, I learned from this book that I do not like reading about people who are sick in a way where they're glorifying the sickness. The other book I DNF'd this month was an audiobook that I was listening to through my library, and that was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I DNF'd this one at 50%, and I was very disappointed because I did read The Dead Romantics from this author before, and I loved that book. It was a 5-star. I adored it. This one sounded like it had a really interesting premise as well. It is a romance that is grounded in reality, but with a little bit of magic to it, and I love stuff that just has a little bit of unexplained magic. And I've been getting more into romance lately, and I've read something from this author that I've loved before, so it felt like a perfect recipe, but this one just did not get me invested. The premise of this story is that you're following this woman who moves back into her aunt's apartment after her aunt passes away, and this apartment has this magical thing to it where sometimes it can help you interact with people from the past. So she ends up encountering this man in the apartment who is actually 7 years in the past, and then in the apartment is the only time they're together in that weird little bubble of time. This also happened to her aunt, and her aunt had told her about this, so she kind of knows what to expect and can understand the situation, which I also liked because it just slips you right into this weird little bit of magical world without having to delve into all the explanations. Like, I did like the setup of this a lot and just the concept of it, but I was not feeling the chemistry between these two characters. I just wasn't vibing with the plot and the pacing of it very much. I couldn't root for the characters, and that's really important to me in romance. I don't really know what happened with this one and why it didn't work for me. It had all the ingredients to work, but it just did not, so I DNF'd it. Now going into the books that I did complete, starting with my least favorite book of the month, that was Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. Talk about another book that should have worked for me, that had the good ingredients, but it just did not. And I think part of my experience was hindered because I did the audiobook, and I abhorred the audiobook narration in this. It took me so long to just get past the narrator's voice and the way that they were bringing the story to life. It felt so dramatic. It just didn't feel like I was listening to a book. It really was not working for me. I probably should have tried to switch earlier, and I do wonder if that would have affected my experience at all had I read the ebook or a physical book. But all in all, I found this story to be very slow paced. What this one is about is these two women, and they end up meeting at a farmer's market, and then they develop this obsession type of relationship together, and one of them might be doing something weird, builds up to this big thing at the end. The end was big, and I can't say it was surprising because I had an idea of exactly where it was going to go, but maybe if you didn't, then it would feel big and surprising and satisfying and worth it. But for me, I just didn't care about the story. I just didn't care about following these characters. I was just ready for it to get on with the show. It just felt like it was dragging just to build to this thing for me to be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I thought was happening, and then it ends. But I think I'm the outlier here. I've heard a lot of really good reviews of this, so if it sounds interesting to you, maybe still check it out, but for me, this was a huge miss. The next two books I have to talk about, I didn't despise, I just didn't really feel anything for. honestly the third one as well. We're going through all my 2 stars right now. That was my first 2-star. I have 3 more 2 stars to tell you about. It was a 2-star heavy month. The next one that is up is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. I have read from Geneva Rose before. I found it to be underwhelming when I've read from her in the past. She writes domestic thrillers. I'm not always drawn to domestic thrillers. I didn't have high hopes going into this one, but I had a free copy of it through the ALC program from Libro FM, so I decided to listen to the audiobook just to kill some time because I was trying to get through some audiobooks for the read-a-thon. Also, it has a really cool cover, and a cool cover will always pull me in. So I gave it a chance, but I didn't end up feeling anything for the story. It's a book about these siblings, and their mother passes away, and their father has been missing, and after their mother's death and the siblings get back together, they're watching these home videos, and then they see this home video. I don't remember how much the synopsis gives away, but they see a home video where something happens that makes them look at their father a different way, and then they're trying to piece together maybe what happened to some mysteries that have been going on in their community. I did not get connected to these characters. I didn't feel like a lot was really happening. It was mostly just sibling drama from what I can remember. This is another book where I feel like I spent a lot of time waiting for something to happen, and then at the end, finally things do, but it wasn't worth the build up to me. I also remember there being a lot of metaphors and cliches used in the writing, which I don't like in my thrillers. I kind of just like you to get to the point. If it's overloaded with cliches, it's really noticeable to me, and I did not vibe with that. So all in all, not a memorable one for me, not a book that I would necessarily recommend. Okay, this next one is my bad. This is my mistake because I thought I was reading something entirely different from what I was reading when I picked this book up. And then by the time I realized this book was not what I thought it was, I was already too far into it and it was pretty short. So I was like, whatever, I'll just finish the book. But I cannot blame the book for the 2-star rating. If I would have known what this was, I would have known that I wouldn't have liked it. But you know, this was a mistake. And also because I'm in a read-a-thon, I'm trying to like get through books. So once I was already in it, I'm like, well, this is wasted time. I might as well just finish the book so I can count the book towards the read-a-thon. It was a whole thing. But the book I'm talking about is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. And here's the mistake I made. So I have remembered hearing some things about this T. Kingfisher book that is about this animated sword. Like this person gets trapped in a sword and then someone finds the sword, and I think there might even be a romance element between them. I thought that sounded cute and fun, and I'm in a cozier mood, and so I was like, oh, let me read that book. And so I go on my little apps. I think I got this on Everand, and I was looking through T. Kingfisher books, and I was like, oh yes, Thornhedge. Like, look at the cover of this one. That's exactly what I remember it being. This is the story. I did not think anything of it. I clicked on it and I listened to it. That's not what this book is about. That book is called Sword Heart. So I do want to read Sword Heart eventually, but you know, instead I got Thornhedge this month. And I have read from T. Kingfisher in the past, and to be honest, I've never loved a story from T. Kingfisher. I know that a lot of people really love T. Kingfisher stories, but I've never just had one that was a huge hit for me. But I do want to keep giving their stuff a chance just to see if something can resonate, and especially the Sword Heart one, because that sounds cute and fun to me. This one, however, is basically a Sleeping Beauty retelling with a twist. I don't really want to say too much about my experience with it because it was tainted anyway. Like, don't trust my opinion because I didn't know what I was reading, and part of my issue with it was I didn't follow what was happening in the story, and the pacing and the structure was weird. That could have been resolved by knowing what the book was about, probably. So it was just not a good experience for me. I didn't love it, didn't really get invested in the characters. The concept was fine, I guess, of what it ended up doing, the twist that it takes on the Sleeping Beauty tale, but it just didn't resonate with me a ton. I'm not a huge reader of retellings anyway, but if you're looking for a Sleeping Beauty retelling and you didn't know this existed, then maybe check it out. My final 2-star of the month is the biggest heartbreak to me that I think I've had all year, because I live my life. I go through my days and my months and my year waiting for the next Emily Henry book. That's what keeps me alive. And so this month I got around to Funny Story, and Funny Story, I did not love it. In this story, you're following Daphne and Miles, and these two were both in their own relationships. Daphne was engaged to this guy named Peter, and Miles was in a relationship with this woman named Petra, and Peter and Petra were childhood friends. And right before Daphne and Peter get married, he calls off the engagement because he's like, me and Petra are in love and we're gonna be together, so you've got to get out of the house. And so Daphne ends up moving in with Miles because now he's got a vacancy in his apartment and he could use the help with the rent. And then it ends up being the romance story that happens between them as they find themselves living together and then in a fake dating situation. I love forced proximity. I love fake dating. I love Emily Henry. I don't know what went wrong here, but this one just didn't do it for me. I liked the concept, I liked the setup, but I didn't get invested in the characters, I didn't get invested in the romance. I really didn't feel like much was happening in the story. Even the side characters didn't really stand out to me or feel like well-developed people. In the end, a lot of trauma starts coming out that I felt like we could have been leading to earlier in the book. There were just a lot of things that did not work for me in this. Even the banter I felt was lacking in this, and I love Emily Henry's banter. So I think this might just be a little bit of a fluke for me. It has been my least favorite Emily Henry I've read so far. If you're curious what my rankings and my ratings are, these are all the books I've read from Emily Henry so far and what my ratings of them have been, and unfortunately this one is ending up at the bottom. No one is more heartbroken about it than me. Hopefully it's just a fluke, and the next one I'll be back on board. Next up was a 2.5 star read. I felt pretty neutral about this book. There were some things I liked and some things I didn't like, and that is Your Shadow Half Remains by Sunny Moraine. I listened to this one on audiobook through the Everand app, and I thought it had a compelling premise. It definitely has a great cover, and it sounded like something that I would like, but it did leave me feeling like there was more to be desired in this book. This is a dystopian, apocalyptic type of story that's kind of like Bird Box. The characters are living in this world where you can't look at another person or they might go crazy and kill you. So the main character following is a girl named Riley, and she's been living on her own, and then all of a sudden she has this new person who moves in near her, and they start spending some time together, and then Riley starts questioning her safety and if she can even trust herself. I like the concept. It reminds me of several different things, sort of Bird Box in the world building element of it, sort of the book And Then I Woke Up in the what's going on and how can we trust ourselves element of the book, and then also kind of the movie Bones and All, based on the vibe of those two characters getting together and going through a journey. So I liked the concept of it. It was reminiscent of things that I've enjoyed in the past. It just wasn't fully enjoyable for me. After I finished the book and I sat on it and I thought, oh, here's what this book might be doing, that could be an interesting thing, I appreciated the idea of it, but in the experience of actually reading the book, I was like, this is fine. Everything from this point on is a 3-star or above, so we are now in the enjoyable part of the video. The first book I have to talk about is One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole, which I ended up listening to on audiobook through my library. This is the new book from the same author of When No One Is Watching, which I did enjoy in the past, so I was looking forward to see what Alyssa Cole did next, and this one had an interesting premise to it. This was also included in a reading blog that I did this month, so you can check that video out for my full thoughts and experience with the book. But to give you a quick high-level view of it, you're following this character named Kenitra Nash, and she has a lot of alternate personalities. She has dissociative identity disorder, and she has some personalities that sort of stay in her inner world, some personalities that take over as host and live in the outer world. And the main personality you're following is Ken, who has been dormant for 6 years, and then Ken comes back as host and realizes that they don't know what's going on in their world and that everything has been sort of turned upside down. They are now taking on this job to be a caretaker at this house on this island, and once they get there, there are some weird connections that they are noticing, and also a mystery that's going on in the inner world and in the outer world. I'm being very vague about it because the synopsis doesn't give away everything, and I thought it was really interesting to see even what the mysteries were going to be as I was actually reading the book. So I want to leave that as something that you can have revealed to you as you're reading the story. But I really like the concept of this one. I really like the atmosphere of it. I thought it had an intriguing mystery. I was very intrigued the whole time as to what was going to happen. It is a very slow burn book. The synopsis tells you that a murder occurs, but that murder doesn't occur until like 75% of the way through the story. So it's a slow burn, but it's one that kept me interested throughout the slow burn. And then when the ending and everything happens, the payoff felt good. So I didn't love this book. I didn't think it was perfectly executed. I do wish it was faster paced, but I had a good time with it. It was a really easy audiobook listen, and I would recommend it. Next up is Natural Beauty, and I ended up giving this one a 3-star as well. I did think this would be a book I would love based on people I've seen loving it, who I have similar taste to, the reviews I've heard about it. I just went in expecting a lot from this book, so it was a little bit of a disappointing 3-star rather than being a good 3-star for me personally, just because I had such high hopes going into it. The first time I read this book, and I say the first time because I read it twice, the first time I read this book, I thought surely I've missed something because it just felt really incomplete to me. So the first time I listened to it on audiobook, and then when I was left feeling like I missed something, I went back through the ebook and sort of skimmed my way through the entire book again. I also did read this in that reading vlog I did, so my experiences in that video as well if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts. But the concept of this one is that you're following this woman who starts working in the beauty industry, and the whole story is sort of a metaphorical vehicle for talking about racial and ethnic cleansing. It's a very disorienting story. Your main character is losing her sense of time and place, and that is very much reflected in the writing style. So that is also why I felt like things were maybe missing, because you just jump around with her so often that sometimes I'm like, whoa, wait, who, what, where, when, why? The best way I can describe this is it felt like when you have a really vivid nightmare and then you wake up the next day and you're like, wow, I've got to tell someone about that. And so you're telling your friend about your nightmare, and in your mind it felt like this movie that played through so well, but then when you're retelling it, you're like, oh, I'm just saying a bunch of like random things that happen that are sort of conjoined, and then I'm kind of skipping from like this happened to this happened, and your friend's like, this is not that interesting, I don't know why you're regaling me of these details of your nightmare. That's sort of how I feel about this book. I appreciated it, I appreciated what it was trying to do, but it just did not fully work for me. So I gave it a 3 because it was a little bit generous. It's probably more of a personal 2, but conceptually it was doing some interesting things, so it gets the 3. The next 2 books that were both 3 stars are both in the same reading vlog, so I'll send you there if you want to hear full thoughts, full details, and I will just give you my brief thoughts on these books. The first one is The Eyes Are the Best Part. This is a horror book that is coming out in June that I was able to read through NetGalley because the publishers sent me an ARC. This was good. It was okay. The best thing about it in terms of effectiveness is how much it grossed me out. You're following this young woman who is 18 years old at the time, and she's going through a lot of things in her life. Her father leaves her mother's kind of losing it, her mother gets a new boyfriend, she herself is starting community college for the first time, she's got a younger sister she's trying to support emotionally. There's just a lot going on in her life, and then she gets this obsession with eyeballs, and that leads to violence. So you're following her descent throughout the book, and it felt a little bit obvious to me. I didn't feel like I got any great surprises. I didn't feel like it did anything that I wasn't expecting it to do from the synopsis. So I was just hoping for more from this. But in general, I thought it was fine. It was okay. If eyeballs really freak you out, I think you'll be able to manage the book, because eyeballs personally freak me out so much. I hate just even being conscious of the fact that I have eyeballs. So if I was able to get through it, I think you'll be okay, like you'll be able to get through it. But if you don't want to even put yourself in that experience, just don't do it, because there's a lot of eyeballs in the book. Next is The Midnight Feast from Lucy Foley. This is her latest book. This is also coming out in June. I also read it on NetGalley, and I liked this one. I enjoyed it. I just didn't love it. This is a story that is set in the woods at this resort, and there's this woman named Francesca who's opening this resort. It's the grand opening weekend, so she has the guests all filled in the cabin, and you're following multiple different perspectives. You have Francesca's perspective as the owner. You have her husband's perspective. He was the architect of the whole thing. You have some people who work there that you get their POVs of. You have some of the guests. And the whole story is centered around this mystery of what happened the opening weekend. When the book begins, you know that someone has died, but you don't know who and you don't know how. And then you're going back in time, trying to piece together the puzzle of what has went wrong. So it really builds up like a suspense novel, and it's a really slow burn. But it was really atmospheric. It was fun. I was engaged in the whole story, and I ended up liking it. So I did give it a 3 star. I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite of Lucy Foley's, but I had a good enough time with it. My final 3 star is a book that I revisited this month. I tried to read this book a long time ago. I DNF'd it, and since then so many people have said give it another try, and they said give it another try on audiobook. So I listened to you this time. I do have the physical copy. It's the Thursday Murder Club, but I listened to this one on audiobook through the library, and that was the way to go. I have to say that was the way to go. That got me pulled into the story so much more, and then I did end up enjoying this one. I did give it a 3 star, so I didn't love it, but I did like it, and it has me intrigued enough to continue on in the series. If you're unfamiliar with the story, it's a story where we're following a group of 4 older people who are living in a retirement community, and they like to get together on Thursdays and discuss cold cases and mysteries and see if they can solve them. And then things get really close to home when people start dying around them at the retirement home, and they are put on the case to see if they can figure out what's going on. This was just a really charming book. These are really charming characters, and that's really what pulled me into the story and made me stay interested in it, was following these people. I didn't feel like I loved them fully in this book. I think it's going to take more building in the series for me to get fully attached to all four of them. In this story, I feel like I got most interested in Joyce and Elizabeth as characters, not as much interested in Ibrahim and Ron. So I'm hoping that as the story develops, they become a little more real to me. But my main critique of the story, and the reason that it personally didn't resonate with me as much as it does for so many other people, is this is a very external mystery that requires a lot of external knowledge and exposition, and those are not my favorite types of mysteries. I like very contained mysteries. I like very internal mysteries. If things were going on within this group and they were maybe starting to question each other, I think I would have enjoyed that a little bit more. There's just a lot of external context you have to have about things that are going on to build the mystery. It's sort of like how everyone in my family has killed someone is, which is the similar problem that I have with that book. But all in all, I had a pretty good time with this book. The audiobook was definitely the way to go, and I will definitely be continuing at least the second book in the series, and I will also be doing that on audiobook. Next up, my 4-star read of the month was The Return of Ellie Black by Emiko Jean. I wasn't really expecting to enjoy this book as much as I did, but I think the writing was just really good, and I was just really pulled into this mystery. In this story, there was this girl, Ellie Black, who went missing a couple years ago, and now she has returned, but she's not really talking about what happened, and the detective on the case is really personally involved in this because her sister has gone missing as well, so she's really trying to figure out what happened to Ellie. So you've got a mystery with different points of view, different points in time, and I was just really engaged in this. I really liked it. I wouldn't say it does anything special necessarily. I think it was just a really well done mystery. It definitely surprised me in the end, and it also follows themes that I don't always love to read. Like, I don't really enjoy reading about women who disappear and then bad things happen to them. It's not my favorite thing to read, but I guess because of the way it was handled in the story, I did enjoy it. There was a quote that I really liked in the book that I think just represents some of the themes and the writing style of it. There was a character name mentioned in it, but I'm going to omit the character name in the quote just because this does come kind of at the end of the story, and I don't know, it's not a spoiler, but I think it's just better to omit the character name. So it said, "Why did no one ever tell her that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't natural disasters or wars or weapons? It is unremarkable men with beautiful smiles and even bigger promises." Just kind of reminds me of the themes and some of the writing in Bright Young Woman, which is another book I really enjoyed. This wasn't a perfect book for me. It wasn't a 5-star because probably it didn't have that unique factor for me. It wasn't anything that I haven't fully seen done before, but I just think it was well done. I would definitely recommend it, and it was a book of the month book. So if you have book of the month and you're looking for add-ons and you want a mystery, then I recommend picking this one up. Now we're down to my 2 5-star reads of the month, and the first one is a weird one. Both of these were actually in a reading vlog I did, so if you were watching that reading vlog, you already know that I loved both of these books. But the first one is Butcher and Blackbird, which is this dark romance. It's about these 2 serial killers who both do vigilante killing. They kill bad people who kill other people, so they kill serial killers, and then they end up meeting in these circumstances, and they decide to start this competition where they will meet up annually to have a competition to see who can kill the serial killer first. And then through that, they end up developing a romance of their own. It's really unlike anything I've ever read before. It is silly and goofy, disturbing and dark, erotic and steamy. It's a lot of things, and I think just because it was taking me on such an unpredictable journey is why I just had so much fun with it. I didn't know where it was going to go next. It was just entertaining me. I had a great time with it, and the next book in the series is coming out, I think, like next week. It's very soon, so I'm very much looking forward to that. I do have it pre-ordered. I will definitely be reading Leather and Lark. And then my other 5-star was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is technically the 3rd book in a series, but you can read this as a standalone. They're just loosely connected with some character cameos and little Easter egg type of things that will be more satisfying if you have read the first 2 books, but are definitely not necessary, and it doesn't spoil anything to read this book really, because obviously, you know, in a romance your main characters are gonna end up together. In this story, you're following these 2 characters who both have this curse that they think they have, where every time they'll date someone, right after they end up breaking up, that person finds the love of their life and then gets married and lives happily ever after. So they think they've got these problems that they keep being cursed to relive this over and over again, and then they decide, what if we got together together and sort of dated and then broke up, then wouldn't that be the best case for us? Because then we'll both be able to find our one true love. So it follows them through the summer that they get together and they go on a couple dates, and it's so good, as Abby Jimenez books always are. I've given every book in the series a 5-star. I absolutely love them. I love the way she writes her male main characters. They're just perfect. They're perfect. This is what I want to see. This is what I want to read. While these books are also cute romances, they're also layered with a lot of emotion and trauma and real life issues, and the conflicts between the characters are usually things that feel like real life issues. Once you get to the third act conflict in this book, you're not like, oh my god, it's miscommunication, that's so annoying. You're like, wow, this is some real life issues that could cause people to separate. So I really enjoy that about her books. They feel very authentic, but also very cute, and this is a perfect summer read, so definitely recommend it if you are thinking about checking it out. So that's it for all the books I read in the month of May. Let me know down below if you have read any of the books and what you think about them, or let me know if I convinced you to pick any of them up. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!